The smell hit Sheriff Josiah Blackwood, first sweet decay mingling with wood smoke, drifting down from Harrow Ridge like a prayer gone rotten. Something was burning up there in the Tennessee mountains, something that shouldn't burn, something that used to breathe. In 1899, when lawmen still rode horses through valleys where God's light barely touched the hollers, few dared question what happened beyond the mist line. Blackwood had received the letter 3 days prior, delivered by a trembling postal rider who refused to climb higher than the Methodist Church. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. "They took my boy Samuel. The Grainger family. Please come quick. Martha Hensley." No address, no details, just coordinates scratched in charcoal and a plea that made his stomach turn. The Graingers. Even hardened mountain folk whispered that name like a curse. For 15 years, they'd lived somewhere near the peak of Harrow Ridge, a clan of 7 adults and an unknown number of children who descended to trade only twice yearly. They brought pelts, dried meat, and carved trinkets that sold quickly despite their stench. They spoke little, paid in silver coins that gleamed too bright, and always left before sunset. Blackwood had seen Ezra Grainger once, patriarch of the family, standing 6 feet tall with hollow cheeks and fingers stained permanently black. The man's eyes held no warmth, no recognition of common humanity. When children saw him in town, they hid behind their mother's skirts. "Strange folk keep to themselves," the locals would mutter. "Mountain folk got their ways." But Martha Hensley's boy had vanished 3 weeks ago while hunting rabbit near Grainger territory. Samuel was 12, quick-witted, knew every deer path for miles. Boys like that didn't just disappear. The trail up Harrow Ridge twisted through ancient pines that blocked the September sun. Blackwood's horse grew skittish as they climbed, ears flicking at sounds that weren't quite animal, weren't quite wind. At 2,000 feet, the air thinned and carried whispers, or maybe just his imagination. "They ain't people anymore." By 4 in the afternoon, he reached the tree line where someone had carved symbols into bark. Not Cherokee, not anything he recognized. Fresh cuts, still weeping sap. His hand moved instinctively to his pistol grip. The Grainger homestead sat in a clearing that felt wrong, as if the earth itself recoiled from what it supported. 3 log cabins formed a loose triangle around a central fire pit where bones lay scattered like broken prayers. Not animal bones, too long, too straight. But what would you do when duty demanded you investigate a family that an entire county pretended didn't exist? As Blackwood dismounted, 7 figures emerged from the shadows between buildings, moving with the coordinated silence of wolves who'd found fresh meat. Comment below where you're watching from and what time it is, where you are. This story gets darker as the mountains grow cold. Hit that like button if you're brave enough to climb higher, and subscribe because some secrets were buried for a reason. The Graingers moved like they shared a single mind, fanning out in a half circle that blocked any retreat down the mountain trail. Sheriff Blackwood's horse whinnied and stamped, sensing predators in human clothing. When families live beyond civilization's reach, they develop customs that would horrify those who still believe in law and order. Ezra Grainger stepped forward, his black-stained fingers interlaced behind his back. Up close, Blackwood could see the stains weren't dirt. They were burn marks, as if the man regularly thrust his hands into fire. "Sheriff," Ezra said, voice soft as cemetery dirt. "Mighty long ride for a social call." The others remained silent. A woman with prematurely gray hair and a dress that might have been white decades ago. 2 younger men with identical scars across their throats. An elderly woman whose milky eyes suggested blindness, yet she tracked Blackwood's every movement. A teenage girl who clutched a bundle of something wrapped in oilcloth, something that dripped. And behind them, barely visible in the cabin doorway, a small figure that might have been a child. "Looking for Martha Hensley's boy," Blackwood said, keeping his voice steady. "Samuel, 12 years old. Went missing hunting near your property 3 weeks back. Ezra's smile revealed teeth filed to points. Lots of dangers in these mountains, Sheriff. Bears, wolves, drop-offs that'll swallow a man whole. Could be anywhere by now. The blind woman stepped closer, her head tilted as if listening to voices only she could hear. Pretty horse, she whispered. Been well fed. Meat still tender. Blackwood's hand moved to his weapon, but Ezra raised a palm. Now. Granny Celia just appreciates good livestock. We're hospitable folk, Sheriff. Why don't you stay for supper? Sun's getting low, and these trails ain't safe after dark. From inside one of the cabins came a sound, rhythmic thumping, like someone chopping wood or something softer. The postal records from 1898 listed 7 Graingers registered at this location. Blackwood counted 8 adults in the clearing, plus movement in the shadows suggesting more. Where had the extras come from? Appreciate the offer, Blackwood said, but I need to search the area while there's still light. Boy's mother is worried sick. The teenage girl stepped forward, unwrapping her bundle slightly. Inside was meat, fresh cut and still bleeding, but the color was wrong, too pale, too fine-grained. Tell you what, Sheriff, she said in a voice honey-sweet and spider-soft. You help us with evening chores. We'll tell you everything we know about little Samuel. The chopping sound from the cabin stopped abruptly, replaced by something worse singing. A child's voice, high and pure, echoing from somewhere that might have been underground. They eat the lost ones. But what happens when a lawman realizes he might be the next course on a family's twisted menu? As twilight painted the mountains blood red, Sheriff Blackwood heard horses approaching from the trail below. But when he turned to look, the Graingers were already moving to surround him completely. The approaching hoofbeats belonged to 2 riders, who emerged from the pine shadows like ghosts summoned by nightfall. Sheriff Blackwood felt a moment of relief until he saw their faces hollow-eyed, moving with the same predatory coordination as the Graingers themselves. When isolation breeds for generations, the line between family and something else entirely begins to blur. That's Deputy Kane and Deputy Morrison, Ezra announced, though Blackwood had never seen these men before in his life. They wore badges, carried weapons, spoke with authority, but their eyes held the same emptiness as the Grainger clan. They've been helping us with our evening chores. The supposed deputies dismounted without speaking. Kane was tall and rail-thin, his uniform stained with substances that might have been mud. Morrison moved with a pronounced limp, favoring his left leg, as if something had taken a bite from his thigh and healed wrong. From the central cabin, the child's singing grew louder, more insistent. The melody was familiar, Rock of Ages, but the words were different, darker. Something about sleeping deep and feeding well. This is a family matter, Sheriff, Kane said, his voice carrying a mountain drawl thick as molasses. Best if you ride on down before full dark. These hills got a way of keeping visitors. Blackwood noticed details that made his skin crawl. Morrison's badge was pinned to his shirt with human teeth. Kane's holster was made from skin that bore fingernail marks, as if someone had clawed desperately while it was being removed. Both men smelled of smoke and something sweet-sick that reminded him of the slaughterhouse back in town. Court records from Knox County, dated March 15, 1897. Deputies Lawrence Kane and William Morrison reported missing during patrol of remote mountain territories. Search abandoned after 2 weeks. Presumed deceased. I know you boys, Blackwood said slowly, or knew of you. You've been dead near 2 years. Morrison laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Dead's a strong word, Sheriff. We're more repurposed. The teenage girl with the meat bundle began laying out tools on a wooden table. Knives, bone saws, iron hooks still warm from some unseen fire. The blind woman hummed along with the child's underground singing, her fingers working at something in her lap that looked suspiciously like hair being braided into rope. Ezra gestured toward the largest cabin. "Come now, Sheriff. Time for evening chores. We've got rendering to do, and a strong back's always welcome." Through the cabin's window, Blackwood glimpsed movement that shouldn't exist, shapes hanging from rafters, swaying gently in non-existent wind. Some still wore clothing. Some still wore faces he recognized from missing person reports that crossed his desk monthly. The Graingers had turned law enforcement into willing accomplices, creating a network that fed their appetites while protecting their secrets. They served many masters now. But what happens when a sheriff realizes the very badge on his chest might not protect him from becoming the next recruit in this mountain family's twisted version of justice? As full darkness settled over Harrow Ridge, Blackwood heard more voices joining the underground chorus and recognized one of them as belonging to Samuel Hensley, the boy he'd come to save. The singing came from beneath their feet, filtering up through gaps in the cabin floorboards like prayers from a congregation that had long forgotten God's name. Sheriff Blackwood counted at least 12 distinct voices, all children, all harmonizing in that same corrupted hymn. When lawmen vanish without trace, their badges don't simply disappear. They find new owners who understand the true meaning of service. "Samuel's got such a sweet voice," the gray-haired woman said, stirring a pot over the fire pit. The contents bubbled thick and dark, releasing steam that carried hints of copper and fear. "Took 'em near a week to learn our songs proper, but children adapt so quick when they're motivated." Deputy Kane opened the cabin door, revealing an interior that defied the laws of architecture. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, disappearing into shadows where things rustled and whispered. But it was the floor that drew Blackwood's attention. A trapdoor, reinforced with iron bands, secured by a lock that looked older than the mountain itself. 19 families, Ezra said, following Blackwood's gaze. 19 families sent their lost ones to us over the years. Hunters, trappers, children who wandered too far from home. "We keep them safe down there, Sheriff. Keep them singing." Morrison limped to a wall where newspaper clippings hung like trophies, headlines from across the region. "Boy vanishes near Pine Ridge. Traveling merchant never reaches destination. Search called off for missing family." Each article was dated, annotated in that same black-stained handwriting, with notes like "good bones," and lasted 3 months, and "screamed too much," processed early. The teenage girl set her meat on the table and began sharpening a cleaver with practiced strokes. "Daddy says you got a choice, Sheriff. Join our family proper-like, or go down with the singers. Either way, you ain't leaving this mountain." From below came a new sound, scratching, as if fingernails were clawing at wood. The children's voices faltered, replaced by whimpering and the scrape of chains. Court records from 1884 showed the original Grainger homestead burning down, claiming the lives of Ezra's parents and 3 siblings. But fire investigation notes mentioned something troubling. Bodies found in basement displayed evidence of deliberate starvation and restraint. Circumstances suggest imprisonment rather than accidental death. "My daddy learned from his daddy," Ezra continued, "and his daddy learned from the old ways. Mountain folk always known how to preserve what's precious, how to make things last when winter comes hard and game runs scarce." The blind woman, Granny Celia, rose from her chair and approached Blackwood with shuffling steps. Her fingers traced the air around his face, as if reading Braille written in fear. "This one's strong," she whispered. "Good lungs, good voice, but his badge tastes of justice. Might curdle the harmony." Kane drew his weapon, a revolver modified with human finger bones as grip decoration. "Strip the badge, Sheriff. Strip everything that ties you to the world below. Up here, we follow different laws. They never really die here." But what would you do when faced with the choice between joining a family of monsters or becoming food for their underground choir of the lost? As the scratching sounds from below grew more frantic, Blackwood realized the children weren't just singing. They were trying to warn him about what was coming up through the floorboards. The iron lock clicked open with a sound like breaking bones, and the trapdoor swung wide to release a stench that made Sheriff Blackwood's eyes water. Below lay a pit carved directly into the mountain stone heart, lined with cages that stretched deeper than his lantern light could reach. When children disappear into darkness, their voices don't simply fade, they transform into something else entirely. Samuel Hensley stood in the nearest cage, 12 years old, but aged decades by whatever he'd witnessed in the depths. His clothes hung in tatters, his fingernails worn to bloody nubs from clawing at stone walls. When he saw Blackwood, his eyes lit with desperate hope before Ezra's shadow fell across the opening. "Show the sheriff our collection, boy," Ezra commanded. Samuel's voice cracked as he began to recite. Mary Caldwell, age 8, missing since June. Tommy Morrison, no relation to our deputy, age 10, been here since spring. The Hutchins twins, Sarah and Rebecca, age 7 each, they came together in August. His voice broke completely. And the others who don't talk no more. In the deeper cages, shapes moved with the broken rhythm of minds shattered beyond repair. Blackwood counted at least 15 children, some so thin their ribs showed through torn clothing, others rocking back and forth while humming melodies that had no earthly origin. The teenage girl who Blackwood now realized couldn't be more than 16 herself descended into the pit with practiced ease. "I was the first," she called up. "Been here so long I forgot my real name. They call me Harvest now, on account of I help gather the new ones." A journal entry, dated October 2nd, 1899, found years later in the ruins. The music never stops. Each new voice adds to the harmony. "Daddy says we're building something beautiful down here. Something that will sing forever." Deputy Morrison lit additional lanterns, illuminating the full scope of the underground chamber. Carved into the walls were symbols that hurt to look at directly, sigils that seemed to writhe and pulse in the flickering light. Human bones formed decorative patterns between the stones, arranged with artistic precision that spoke of years of careful collection. "The children provide more than just their voices," Granny Celia explained, her blind eyes somehow tracking the movements below. "Their fear seasons the meat, makes it tender. Their hope gives us strength. Their despair," she smiled with those filed teeth, "their despair opens doors that should stay closed." Kane gestured with his decorated pistol toward a larger cage at the chamber's far end. Inside, adult shapes huddled together the deputies who'd come before, the merchants and trappers who'd vanished over the years. They'd been kept alive, fed just enough to survive, their minds broken by months or years of watching children disappear into cooking pots while they waited their turn. Blackwood felt the mountain itself pressing down on him, felt the weight of 15 years of accumulated horror seeping through the stone. The Graingers hadn't just been killing, they'd been building something, creating a monument to appetite that fed on more than flesh. They feast on suffering itself. But what happens when a sheriff realizes that rescue isn't possible, that the only choice left is between becoming another voice in the underground choir or finding a way to silence the song forever? As Harvest began selecting which child would join them for evening chores, Blackwood's hand found something in his coat pocket, a stick of dynamite he'd forgotten, left over from clearing rock slides on the lower mountain roads. The dynamite felt warm against Sheriff Blackwood's fingers, a single stick of salvation wrapped in oiled paper and topped with enough fuse to give a man time to pray. Around him, the Grainger family moved with the casual efficiency of people who'd performed this ritual countless times before. When good men stand witness to evil, their choices define not just their own souls, but the souls of those they're sworn to protect. Harvest climbed back up from the pit, dragging Samuel Hensley by his ankle chains. The boy's eyes met Blackwood's with a mixture of hope and resignation that cut deeper than any blade. "Please," Samuel whispered. Don't let them put me in the pot. I've been good. I've been singing like they want." Ezra selected a cleaver from the table, running his blackened thumb along its edge until blood welled dark as mountain soil. "Sheriff's going to watch, boy. Going to see how we prepare our evening meal. Then he'll understand why cooperation serves everyone better than resistance." The other children's voices rose from below, a desperate harmony that seemed to shake the cabin's foundations. They knew what was coming. They'd watched it happen to others, would watch it happen again, until their own turn arrived. Deputy Kane positioned himself between Blackwood and the door, while Morrison checked the windows, ensuring no escape route remained open. The blind woman began laying out plates made from skull fragments, each one carved with names and dates, a macabre dinner service built from victims. "You're wondering about the law," Ezra said, reading Blackwood's expression, "about right and wrong, about duty and justice. But up here, Sheriff, we follow older laws, the law of appetite, the law of survival." From his coat, Blackwood pulled out Martha Hensley's letter, the desperate plea that had brought him to this mountain of horrors. The paper trembled in his hands as he read aloud. "They took my boy Samuel. Please come quick." A newspaper clipping from the Knoxville Journal, dated November 15, 1899. Sheriff Josiah Blackwood reported overdue from Mountain Patrol. Search parties found his horse wandering near Harrow Ridge. Saddlebags intact, but rider missing. Investigation pending. "His mama's been waiting 3 weeks, Blackwood said quietly, sitting by her window, watching the road, praying her boy comes home safe. What am I supposed to tell her?" Harvest giggled, a sound like breaking glass mixed with birdsong. "Tell her he found a new family. Tell her he's part of something bigger now, something that'll last forever." The gray-haired woman stirred her pot, adding herbs that smelled of graveyard earth and dying flowers. "We all got mothers once, Sheriff, but family ain't just blood. Families choosing to feed each other, to keep each other warm when the world turns cold." Granny Celia shuffled closer, her milk-white eyes fixed on Blackwood's face. "I can smell your decision cooking, lawman. Smells like gunpowder and desperation, but bullets can't kill what we've become. This mountain's got too much hunger built into its bones." The singing from below grew louder, more frantic, as if the children sensed their protector wavering between duty and survival. They're counting on him now. But what would you do when saving one innocent child means destroying yourself, and failing means watching that child join a chorus of the eternally lost? As Ezra raised the cleaver above Samuel's trembling form, Blackwood made his choice not between life and death, but between the kind of man he'd been and the kind of man these mountains demanded him to become. Sheriff Blackwood's thumb struck the match with the practiced motion of a man who'd lit countless campfires, but this flame carried the weight of judgment itself. The dynamite's fuse caught immediately, hissing like a serpent awakened from ancient sleep. Sometimes salvation requires destroying everything you came to save, trusting that God sorts the innocent from the guilty in the smoke and fire. "What in hell?" Ezra began, but Blackwood was already moving. He shoved Samuel toward the cabin's rear window while the fuse burned down, counted heartbeats like a prayer, and dove for the same opening as the world exploded behind them. The blast shattered the night into fragments of light and thunder. Timber and stone erupted skyward, while the mountain itself seemed to scream through the fissures opening in its ancient flesh. The underground chamber collapsed in sections, burying the cages and their occupants beneath tons of granite and regret. Blackwood and Samuel rolled down the rocky slope, protected by pine boughs and providence as debris rained around them like judgmental hail. When the settling dust revealed what remained, only one cabin stood intact. The others had been reduced to burning splinters and scattered bones, but the Graingers were far from finished. Ezra emerged from the flames, his clothes smoldering, but his filed teeth gleaming in the firelight. Half his face was gone, revealing skull beneath, yet he walked with the same predatory grace. "You've destroyed our collection, Sheriff. 15 years of careful gathering. gone. Kane and Morrison flanked him, their stolen badges now melted into their flesh, but their weapons still functional. The teenage girl called Harvest crawled from the wreckage, her left arm bent at impossible angles, but her eyes bright with murderous intent. The children, Samuel sobbed against Blackwood's chest. They're all still down there. They're trapped. From beneath the rubble came muffled cries, faint but desperate. Some of the underground chamber had survived, leaving pockets where the lost ones waited for rescue that might never come. Blackwood felt the weight of every voice silenced by his choice, every small life traded for the possibility of ending this nightmare. A letter found in the ruins by federal investigators, dated October 31st, 1899. To whoever finds this, the Graingers ain't human no more. They've been feeding on more than flesh. Something in these mountains changed them, made them into something that can't be killed easy. The only way to stop them is fire. J.B. You think you won something? Granny Celia appeared through the smoke, her blind eyes now glowing like coals. We've been feeding this mountain for generations. Our blood's in the stone, our hunger's in the wind. Kill us, and we just become part of the song that never ends. The gray-haired woman stepped from the flames, her dress now ash but her smile eternal. Besides, Sheriff, you think we're the only family up here? These mountains got dozens of hollows, hundreds of caves. The Graingers was just the beginning. Ezra raised a bone knife that had survived the explosion. But we'll settle for making you both part of our legacy. Your bones will remember what you tried to do here. The survivors moved in their familiar coordination, surrounding Blackwood and Samuel with the patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere left to run. They always come back hungry. But sometimes, the mountain itself decides when enough blood has been spilled, and the very stones cry out for justice that only God can provide. As the Grainger family closed in for their final kill, a sound echoed from the valley below horses, dozens of them, carrying torches, and righteous men who'd finally found the courage to climb where angels feared to tread. The torches ascending Harrow Ridge looked like fallen stars climbing back toward heaven, each flame carried by men who'd spent too many years pretending they didn't know what lived above the mist line. Sheriff Blackwood counted at least 30 riders, more help than he dared hope for, but perhaps not enough for what they faced. When entire communities finally confront the evil they've allowed to fester in their silence, the reckoning comes with the weight of accumulated guilt and delayed justice. Martha Hensley rode at the front of the group, her face set with the terrible determination of a mother who'd lost everything and had nothing left to fear. Behind her came farmers, shopkeepers, even the Methodist preacher clutching a rifle alongside his Bible. They'd followed the explosion sound and the glow of burning timber, guided by conscience, finally awakened from its long sleep. "Samuel!" Martha's voice cracked the night air as she spotted her son in Blackwood's arms. The boy's answering cry, "Mama," carried 15 years of stolen children's voices in its desperate joy. But the Graingers weren't finished teaching their lessons about appetite and survival. Ezra stepped into the torchlight, his ruined face reflecting flames like a mirror made of malice. "You brought witnesses to our family business," he told Blackwood. "That's unfortunate. Now we'll have to expand our dining arrangements." The gray-haired woman began humming that same corrupted hymn, and the sound seemed to wake something in the mountain itself. The ground trembled, loose stones skittered down slopes, and from cracks in the earth came voices, not the trapped children, but something older, hungrier, more patient than human appetite. Kane and Morrison spread wide, their modified weapons gleaming in the torchlight. Harvest dragged herself upright, using a broken timber as a crutch, her young face twisted with rage that belonged to something ancient and evil. Federal Marshal Report, filed December 3, 1899. Investigation of Harrow Ridge incident reveals evidence of systematic murder dating back to 1875. Physical remains suggest minimum 37 victims, though exact count impossible due to extensive desecration. Surviving witnesses report supernatural elements that strain credibility. "You people spent 15 years pretending we didn't exist," Granny Celia called to the approaching riders. 15 years buying our meat, trading for our goods, taking our silver without asking where it came from. You're as guilty as we are." The accusation hit home. Several riders slowed their horses, hands trembling on reins and weapons. They remembered the Graingers' visits to town, the way conversations died when those black-stained fingers counted out payment for supplies. They'd chosen willful blindness over difficult questions. Martha Hensley raised her rifle, sighting down the barrel at Ezra's heart. "You took my boy. You took him, and hurt him, and would have killed him. I don't care what else you are, you're going to die tonight." The shot echoed across the mountain, a sound like judgment itself. Ezra staggered but didn't fall, black ichor oozing from the wound instead of blood. He laughed, a sound like breaking tombstones. "Bullets can't kill what's already dead inside," he wheezed, "but fire might teach you what real hunger feels like." The surviving Graingers began to change, their human facades melting away to reveal something that had been feeding on more than flesh for decades. Shapes that had once been people, but were now walking appetites animated by the mountain's ancient hunger. Some appetites never die. The battle for Harrow Ridge was about to begin, and Sheriff Blackwood realized that some evils run so deep into the earth that killing them might require burying the entire mountain. In the shadows beyond the torchlight, more shapes moved, suggesting the Graingers were just one branch of a family tree whose roots stretched through every dark hollow in these hills. Even today, locals claim that when the fog rolls thick through Appalachian valleys, you can still hear children singing hymns with words that were never meant for human voices. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even darker. Subscribe before it drops. The battle lasted until dawn painted the mountain peaks blood red, and when the smoke finally cleared, 37 men had learned what it meant to fight something that refused to stay dead. Sheriff Blackwood stood among the survivors, Samuel Hensley clutched against his chest, both of them staring at what remained of the Grainger family, scattered across the scorched earth. When evil takes root so deep that it becomes part of the land itself, destroying it requires more than bullets and fire. It demands a sacrifice that echoes through generations. The townspeople had brought coal, oil, and dynamite, turning Harrow Ridge into a funeral pyre that burned for 3 days straight. But even as the flames consumed flesh and bone, the mountain itself seemed to resist, as if the very stone had absorbed decades of concentrated malice and wouldn't release it easily. Martha Hensley found her son changed in ways that went beyond physical scars. Samuel spoke in whispers for months afterward, flinching at hymn music and refusing to eat meat of any kind. On quiet nights, neighbors claimed they could hear him singing not the corrupted songs the Graingers had taught him, but older melodies, as if he'd learned something down in that pit that predated human language. Ezra's body was never found intact. Pieces of him turned up, scattered across 3 counties over the following year. A charred hand clutching a bone knife in a creek bed, a skull fragment with filed teeth discovered in a barn loft, a rib cage hanging from tree branches like some hellish wind chime. Each fragment was burned again, blessed by 7 different preachers, and buried in consecrated ground. A geological survey from 1902 noted unusual mineral deposits throughout the Harrow Ridge area. Extensive carbon staining in bedrock suggests repeated exposure to extreme heat over a period of several decades. Local stone composition includes trace elements not native to regional geology, possibly indicating contamination from unknown organic sources. The other children weren't so fortunate. When rescue crews finally excavated the collapsed underground chamber, they found evidence of the choir, but no survivors. Bones, clothing fragments, carved initials in stone walls, testimony to 15 years of accumulated horror. 23 sets of remains were identified and returned to families across 5 states. The rest, too damaged or too old to name, were buried in a common grave, marked only with the date and a simple inscription, "The Lost Ones." But the mountain kept its secrets in other ways. Federal investigators documented strange phenomena in the months following the incident: livestock refusing to graze on Harrow Ridge, hunting dogs turning vicious after drinking from streams that flowed down from the scorched peak, travelers reporting voices in the wind, singing hymns that made their horses bolt in terror. The town of Cedar Hollow, 15 miles south of Harrow Ridge, was abandoned entirely in 1904 after 3 children vanished in a single week. Search parties found evidence of organized predation: bone tools, carved symbols, meat-smoking operations hidden in caves that connected to an underground network stretching back toward the Granger property. Sheriff Blackwood served another 20 years before retiring, but he never spoke publicly about what happened on the mountain. His official report listed the incident as elimination of organized criminal family engaged in murder and cannibalism. The supernatural elements, the way the Graingers had continued fighting after sustaining fatal wounds, the voices that seemed to come from the mountain itself, those details were buried in classified federal files that wouldn't be declassified until 1975. A diary entry from Martha Hensley, dated October 31st, 1900. Samuel woke up screaming again last night. He says they're still down there, still singing, waiting for someone to dig them out. I tell him it's just nightmares, but sometimes I hear it too. Children's voices carried on the wind from up the mountain. The doctor says trauma can make you imagine things, but what if it's not imagination? What if some hungers are too deep to die? They never really left the mountain. The Granger homestead was never rebuilt. The land was purchased by the federal government in 1906 and designated as protected wilderness, though the protection seemed designed more to keep people out than to preserve nature. Hikers who ignore the warnings and venture onto Harrow Ridge report finding foundations that shouldn't exist, stone chambers that weren't on any survey map, and carved symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when viewed directly. Modern paranormal investigators document temperature drops of 30 degrees within a 100-yard radius of the original Granger property. Electronic equipment malfunctions. Photographs develop with faces that weren't visible when the pictures were taken. And in the deep winter, when snow covers the ridge and muffles all sound, locals swear they can still hear children singing hymns that no church ever taught. The Appalachian Mountains hold many secrets in their ancient folds, but some secrets hold you back. The Granger family may have been destroyed, but they were never truly alone on those peaks. Federal records suggest at least 12 other isolated family units operating in remote mountain areas throughout the late 1800s, each one developing its own twisted interpretation of survival and hospitality. Samuel Hensley lived to be 87 years old, eventually becoming a respected merchant in Knoxville. But he never married, never had children of his own, and never explained why he left money in his will for a scholarship fund dedicated to keeping children safe from the hunger that lives in high places. On his deathbed in 1962, Samuel's final words were recorded by his attending physician. "Tell them the singing stopped, but the mountain still remembers the taste." They say that even now, when autumn mist rolls through the Tennessee peaks and the wind carries sounds that might be voices, you can hear echoes of that underground choir children who were never properly buried, still performing their eternal concert for an audience of stone and shadow. Some mountains never forget what they've been fed. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even darker. Subscribe before it drops.